The Galactic Concord did not send us a war fleet. They sent us 6 million starving strangers, and they called it a punishment. They were certain it would break us. They had no idea what they'd just done. I was there the night the first ships came down. I've told this story 100 times since, to my grandchildren, to the history keepers, to the strange tall visitors who come now from across the stars to stand on the cracked tarmac where it happened and ask, in their careful translated voices, is it true? Did it really happen the way they say? And I always tell them the same thing. It happened, and it was stranger and harder and more beautiful than any of the songs they've made of it. So sit down. Let me tell you how Earth answered the cruelest sentence the galaxy ever handed down, and turned it into the thing that changed everything. My name is Mara Okonkwo Vance. The night the ships came, I was 41 years old, a logistics coordinator for the Lagos Atlantic Reclamation Zone, which is a very grand title for a woman who spent her days deciding where shipping containers went and arguing with port machines about it. I was nobody. That's important for this story. Because what happened didn't happen because of presidents or generals or the great names you've heard. It happened because of nobodies. Millions of us. Ordinary people who made a choice, over and over, in 10,000 small moments, until the choice became who we were. But let me set the scene, because you young ones born after, you don't remember the world as it was then. You've only ever known the Earth that's connected to everything. You can't imagine how alone we used to be. It was the year humanity had been part of the wider galaxy for exactly 11 years. I know that sounds like nothing now. Now we've been conquered members for generations. Now there are human cities on 6 worlds and human ships in 100 lanes. But back then, 11 years in, we were the new species. The babies. The ones who'd only just learned that we weren't alone, that the night sky was full of peoples older and richer and more powerful than us, organized into the great sprawling bureaucracy they called the Galactic Concord. And the Concord did not think much of us. I want you to understand that because it shapes everything that came after. To the old species of the galaxy, humanity was a curiosity at best and a nuisance at worst. We were poor. We were young. We had spent the first 10 years of our membership doing nothing but climbing out of the hole we dug ourselves. The wars, the warming, the centuries of carelessness that had left our planet scarred and our species exhausted. We were a recovering world. We had nothing to offer the galaxy that the galaxy wanted. No rare technology, no vast wealth, no fearsome military. We were the small, struggling newcomers, and the Concord treated us accordingly, with a polite, distant, faintly amused contempt, the way you might treat a poor relation who'd shown up uninvited to a rich family's dinner. We had 1 seat on the Concord's lowest council, 1 vote among thousands, and mostly when we used it, the old species voted us down, or ignored us, or laughed. We were used to being looked down on. We'd made our peace with it. We were busy rebuilding our own world. We didn't have time to worry about galactic respect. We figured we'd earn it slowly, over centuries, the way everyone said you had to. We didn't know that the galaxy was about to hand us a chance to earn it all at once, and that it would come disguised as the worst thing that had ever happened to us. The trouble started a long way from Earth, on a world most humans had never heard of, a world called Threnni. I'll tell you about the Threnni, because by the end of this story, you'll love them as much as we came to. They were a people from the far rim of conquered space, a gentle, agrarian folk, tall and slender, with skin like dark river stone and great soft eyes that took up half their faces. They were farmers mostly and poets and keepers of one of the oldest and quietest cultures in the galaxy. They had a saying, the Threnni, that you'll hear again before this story is done. Savannah tell, a stranger is only a friend you have not yet fed. They lived by it. They were, by every account, one of the kindest peoples the stars had ever produced. And kindness, in the galaxy as it was then, was a weakness. Kindness got you noticed by the wrong people. The Threnni had the misfortune to live on a world that sat in the path of something larger than themselves. A dispute I won't bore you with the full history. It's tangled and political and mostly lies anyway between two of the great powers of the Concord. The vast Dominion, a hard, militaristic empire of conquerors, and the block of older species who opposed them. The Threnni world of Threnn sat right between them, in a corridor both sides wanted. And the Threnni, being gentle and poor and unimportant, were in the way. The vast Dominion did what hard, militaristic empires do. They took Threnn. Not in a great dramatic war, there was no war, the Threnni had no army worth the name. They simply arrived and announced that Threnn now belonged to the Dominion, and that the Threnni people were now a problem. An inconvenient population sitting on land the Dominion wanted for its own purposes. 6 million of them. 6 million gentle farmers and poets, suddenly homeless on their own world, conquered, unwanted in the way. And here is where the cruelty began. Because the Dominion didn't want to simply slaughter 6 million people, even in that hard galaxy, open genocide was the kind of thing that drew condemnation, sanctions, trouble. So they reached for something cleverer, something that would get rid of the Threnni and score a political point at the same time. They went to the Concord Council, and they proposed a punishment. It needs explaining, the punishment, because it was a piece of galactic politics so cold and so clever that it still makes me sick to think of it. The Dominion framed it like this. The Threnni, they claimed, had resisted lawful Dominion administration, a lie, but galactic politics runs on lies, and the penalty for such resistance under old Concord law could be relocation. The displaced population could be removed from their world and resettled elsewhere. It sounded almost humane on paper. Relocation, resettlement, not killing, just moving them. But here was the cruelty hidden inside it. The Dominion got to choose where the 6 million Threnni were sent, and the Concord's rules said the receiving world had to accept them. It was a shared burden, a duty of membership. And the Dominion, looking around the galaxy for the worst possible place to dump 6 million starving refugees, looking for the world least able to bear them, the world where the Threnni would surely die slow and miserable deaths, the world whose people would surely turn on them and tear themselves apart trying to cope. They chose Earth. Of course they chose Earth. We were the poorest, youngest, weakest member of the Concord. We were still rebuilding from our own catastrophes. We barely had enough for our own people. 6 million extra mouths, 6 million destitute strangers with nothing, dropped onto a recovering world that could not possibly absorb them. It would be a catastrophe. The Threnni would starve. The humans would be overwhelmed, would resent the newcomers, would descend into conflict and chaos. Both peoples would suffer, and the Dominion would have rid itself of the Threnni while teaching the upstart humans their place, all under the cover of lawful relocation. They called it a punishment for Earth for daring to take up a seat at the galaxy's table. You want to be part of the Concord, little humans, then bear the Concord's burdens. Here, take 6 million mouths you cannot feed and choke on them. They expected us to refuse and be shamed, or to accept and be destroyed. Either way, they won. Either way, the arrogant young humans learned their lesson, and the gentle, troublesome Threnni were swept off the board. It was perfect, it was elegant. It was the cruelest thing I have ever heard of. And it was about to blow up in their faces, in a way no one in that whole ancient galaxy saw coming. I remember the day the news reached Earth. I remember exactly where I was at my desk in the Port Authority, arguing with a cargo routing system, when every screen in the building changed at once to the emergency channel. And I remember the feeling that went through all of us as we understood what had been done to us. It wasn't fear at first. It was a kind of stunned, vertiginous outrage. 6 million. They're sending us 6 million people. We can't, we don't have. How are we supposed to? The numbers were impossible. Earth was still recovering. Whole regions were still being reclaimed from the old disasters. We were stretched thin already, every system strained, every resource accounted for. 6 million destitute refugees arriving with nothing was not a challenge. It was, by every cold calculation, a death sentence for them, and very nearly for us. The galaxy watched to see what we would do. I didn't know it then, but 100 species were watching their screens the way we were watching ours, waiting to see how the poor young humans would handle the burden that had been dropped on them. The Dominion watched, smug, certain. The Threnni, what was left of their leadership, scattered and broken, watched in despair, knowing they were being sent to a world that surely could not want them, that surely would let them die. And in those first hours, I'll be honest with you, it looked like the Dominion was right. The argument started immediately. The fear. The voices, and there were many, and they were not wicked people, they were just frightened, the voices that said, we can't do this. We can't. We can barely feed ourselves. If we take them, our own people will suffer. Our own children will go without. We have to refuse. We have to say no. It's not our problem. It's not our burden. Let someone else. The fear was real. The fear was reasonable. By every law of how the universe was supposed to work, the fear should have won. That's what the Dominion was counting on. They understood fear. They understood scarcity. They understood that frightened people, told there isn't enough, turn on the strangers at the gate every single time. It's the oldest and surest law of the galaxy. When there isn't enough, you protect your own and you let the strangers die. The Dominion had built their whole cruel plan on that law. They forgot to ask whether humans obeyed it. Because something else was happening in those same first hours underneath the fear. Something the old species of the galaxy, in all their ancient wisdom, had never learned to see, because they'd forgotten it themselves so long ago that they no longer believed it was real. It started small. It always starts small. It started with a Threnni child. In the flood of information that came with the relocation order, there were images. The Dominion had included them carelessly, as bureaucratic documentation, pictures of the population being relocated, the way you'd attach a manifest to a shipment. And among those images, broadcast across every screen on Earth, was a photograph of a single Threnni child. She couldn't have been more than 5 in human terms. A tiny Threnni girl with those great soft eyes, sitting in the dust of a transit camp on her conquered world, holding something against her chest. And when people looked closely, and people did look closely, all over Earth, that first day, they saw what she was holding. It was a seed. A single seed from one of the Threnni grain plants, the staple of their gentle farming culture. The child had nothing left in all the universe, no home, no world, no future, sent off to die on a planet she'd never heard of, and she had saved a single seed. Because the Threnni were farmers. Because even a child, even with nothing, even in despair, had thought, wherever they send us, I will plant something. I will make something grow. I will try. That photograph went across Earth like wildfire. A child with nothing, holding a seed, refusing to give up on the idea of a future. And something in us, something deep and old and human, something the galaxy had written off as weakness, something in us broke open. I can't tell you exactly when the mood turned. It wasn't a single moment. It was 10,000 moments, all over the world, all at once. But I can tell you what it felt like from where I stood in the Port Authority in Lagos, watching the screens. It felt like waking up. Because we knew that child. That's the thing the Dominion never understood. We knew her. Every human being who looked at that photograph knew exactly what they were seeing because we had been her. All of us. Every people on Earth carried it in our bones, the memory of being refugees, of being the strangers at the gate, of fleeing with nothing but a seed and a hope. There was not a single human culture that did not have, somewhere in its history, the story of the ancestors who fled, who arrived with nothing, who were taken in or turned away. We were a species made of refugees. Every one of us was descended from someone who had once been exactly that child, holding exactly that seed, throwing themselves on the mercy of strangers. The galaxy looked at 6 million Threnni and saw a burden. We looked at them and saw ourselves. And the voices of fear, the reasonable, frightened voices that said we can't, there isn't enough, it's not our burden, those voices began slowly to be answered. Not by presidents, not by councils, by ordinary people, by nobodies like me. All over the world in a billion conversations, the same answer began to rise up from the bottom, from the streets and the kitchens and the port authorities. And the answer was simple, and it was stubborn, and it was the most human thing in the universe. It went, yes, we're frightened. Yes, there isn't enough. Yes, it'll be hard, maybe harder than anything we've ever done. But they're coming with nothing, and they're going to die if we turn away, and we know what that's like. We have always known what that's like, and we will not be the people who let the strangers die at the gate. Not us. Not Earth. We'll find a way. We'll make there be enough. Get the doors open. They're coming home. It did not happen smoothly. I won't lie to you and say it did. There were terrible arguments. There were people who fought it to the end, out of fear, out of genuine worry for their own families, and some of those people had points that couldn't just be waved away. There was a real and brutal question underneath all the emotion. How? How do you actually feed and house and care for 6 million destitute people on a world that's still rebuilding itself? Good intentions don't grow food. Compassion doesn't build shelter. The how was real, and it was enormous, and the fear that we couldn't manage it was not stupid. But here is the thing about humans that the galaxy had forgotten, the second thing, the thing that turned the choice into a triumph. We are not only the species that takes in strangers, we are the species that solves the impossible problem of how. It's the same gift, really, the refugee's gift. The people who arrive with nothing and survive are the people who become very, very good at making something out of nothing, at improvising, at jury-rigging, at finding the way when there is no way. We had spent the last 10 years rebuilding a broken planet from almost nothing. If there was one thing in the galaxy humanity was actually good at, better than the rich old species who'd never had to struggle, better than anyone, it was doing the impossible with not enough. And so, in those days before the ships came, the whole of Earth turned itself toward a single question, and it was not should we. That had been answered by a child and a seed and the deep memory in our bones. The question became, how? And humanity, the species of refugees and survivors and impossible problem solvers, threw itself at that question with everything it had. The ports were readied, my ports, the ones I ran. I'll tell you in the next part what we did, the logistics miracle we pulled off because I was at the heart of it, and I'll never be prouder of anything. The reclamation zones, the half-rebuilt regions, were opened up. The agricultural systems were pushed past every limit. 1 billion small offers came in. They can stay with us. We have room, we'll share, we'll make space, send them here. The same species that the galaxy thought would tear itself apart over scarcity, instead, did the thing scarcity is supposed to make impossible. It opened its hands and made room. The Dominion watched, and for the first time, a flicker of unease crossed their certainty. This was not the chaos they'd predicted. This was not humans turning on each other. This was something they didn't have a word for, something they'd bred out of themselves so long ago they no longer recognized it. They'd sent 6 million people to Earth as a punishment. And Earth was getting ready to call them neighbors. The ships appeared in our sky 11 days later. I'll never forget the sight of them. I was on the tarmac at the great receiving field we'd built in 11 days out of nothing, a miracle of human improvisation that I'll describe properly in the next part. It was night. The stars were out, and then the stars began to move and grow and resolve into the vast dark shapes of the Dominion transport ships, ugly, brutal things, slave ships really, built to move populations the way you move cargo. They came down through the clouds, dozens of them, each one carrying tens of thousands of frightened Threnni who had been told they were being sent to a world that would let them die. And the whole human crowd at that receiving field, and there were thousands of us, ordinary people who'd come to help, to carry, to welcome. The whole crowd went quiet as those terrible ships came down. And I felt the fear again one last time. The old fear. Can we really do this? Is it really possible? Have we promised something we can't deliver? And then the first ship's great doors ground open, and the first of the Threnni began to come out, slow, terrified, expecting cruelty, expecting rejection, expecting the cold welcome of a world that didn't want them. What they got instead is the rest of the story, and it's the part the galaxy still can't quite believe. But I was there, and I'm telling you it happened. The doors opened, and 6 million strangers were about to find out what humans do. Let me take you back 11 days before the ships, because I promised I'd tell you how we did it. How a poor, recovering world got ready to receive 6 million people in 11 days. Because the how is where the real story lives, and it's the part the songs always leave out. The songs make it sound easy. They make it sound like Earth just opened its heart and everything fell into place. It wasn't like that. It was the hardest 11 days of my life, and the lives of millions like me. And we did it on no sleep and too much coffee and a kind of collective stubbornness that I still don't fully understand. I was put in charge of the Atlantic receiving operation. Me, the logistics nobody who argued with cargo machines. They needed people who knew how to move enormous quantities of things from one place to another, fast, and that turned out to be exactly the skill the moment required. So overnight I went from routing shipping containers to coordinating the arrival of 1 million human beings worth of strangers. I had a headset that never stopped talking and a map of the world that kept filling up with red dots, and I did not sleep more than 2 hours a night for 11 days, and I have never felt more alive. Here is what we were facing. 6 million Threnni arriving with nothing, no food, no homes, no clothes suited to our world, no medicine that worked on their biology, and that was a terror all its own because nobody knew at first whether Earth's air would even be safe for them to breathe, whether our microbes would kill them, whether our food would poison them. The Dominions certainly hadn't bothered to find out. They'd never meant for the Threnni to survive. So the first thing we did, the very first thing before shelter, before food, was science. And this is a part of the story I love, because it shows you something about what humanity actually is. Within hours of the relocation order, every xenobiology lab on Earth, every university, every research institute, dropped what it was doing and turned to one question. How do we keep the Threnni alive on Earth? We had 11 days and almost no data. We had a handful of biological samples that the Threnni leadership, desperate, had managed to transmit to us. And human scientists, thousands of them, in a frantic, sleepless, planet-wide collaboration, the likes of which had never been seen, took that scrap of data and ran. They worked out our air was safe for them, barely, with some who'd need breathing support at first. They worked out which of our foods would nourish them and which would sicken them. They reverse-engineered in 11 days the beginnings of a Threnni-compatible medicine, working from first principles, sharing every discovery instantly and freely across the whole planet. No patents, no secrets, no profit, just get it done. Lives depend on it, share everything. The galaxy would learn later that this was a human specialty too, not just taking in the stranger, but the furious, generous, collaborative genius that humans turn on a problem when they've decided it matters. The old species hoarded their knowledge. We threw ours into a common pile and built on it together, and we did in 11 days what the Concord's own experts said would take a year. It wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough, but it was a foundation. It meant that when the Threnni arrived, we had a fighting chance of keeping them alive, and a fighting chance was all we'd ever needed. A fighting chance is the most human thing there is. Then there was the receiving field itself. You have to picture it. We needed a place to bring tens of thousands of people down at a time, to process them, to begin caring for them, to get them out of those terrible ships and into the beginning of a life. There was no such place. So we built one. In 11 days, on a stretch of reclaimed coastal land, a city of welcome rose up out of nothing, and it was built by volunteers. That's the part I can barely talk about without my eyes filling, even now. We put out the call for help, and humanity came. They came from everywhere. Builders and engineers, yes, but also teachers and cooks, and retired grandmothers and teenagers and people who'd never built anything in their lives. Hundreds of thousands of them, pouring into the reclamation zone to build shelter for strangers they'd never met. I remember standing on a rise above the field on the fourth night, exhausted and looking down at it, this vast, growing, glittering thing, lit up with work lights, swarming with people, going up impossibly fast, and I remember a man next to me, an old welder who'd driven 600 miles to help, who looked down at it with me and said quietly, "My grandmother was a refugee. She always said someone built the camp that saved her and she never knew who, and she spent her whole life wishing she could thank them." He wiped his face with a filthy hand. "I'm building this one for her. So somebody's grandmother gets saved, and somebody someday builds one for somebody else." That was the spirit of it. That was the whole thing in one old welder's words. We weren't just helping the Threnni. We were paying back a debt every human being owed to the strangers who'd once saved our own ancestors, paying it forward, down the endless human chain of someone helped us once, so we help the next ones now. The galaxy thought we were doing something extraordinary. We knew we were just doing what humans do. We were just the latest link in the oldest chain there is. The food was the hardest problem, and the most beautiful solution. 6 million extra people is an enormous amount of food, and we did not have it. We genuinely did not have it. Our agricultural systems were already running at capacity feeding our own recovering population. There was no spare. By every calculation, this was the wall we'd hit, the place where good intentions ran into the brutal arithmetic of calories and couldn't get past it. And here is where humanity did the thing that I think of everything impressed the watching galaxy most. Because we didn't solve the food problem with technology or with some clever trick. We solved it by sharing. The call went out quietly, almost shyly, because it was asking so much. We don't have enough. If everyone gives a little, there'll be enough. Will you give a little? And the world gave a little, almost everyone. Billions of people voluntarily took a little less so that the strangers could eat. Smaller portions, simpler meals, a little less on every plate all over the world freely given so that 6 million people who weren't even the same species could live. It wasn't ordered. It couldn't have been ordered. You can't command billions of people to go hungry for strangers. It was chosen. A whole species deciding together, in a billion small acts of self-denial, that it would rather all eat a little less than let anyone starve. And it turned out that when you spread the sacrifice across 8 billion people, the cost to each one was small, a little hunger, a little less. And the gift to the 6 million was everything, their whole lives. The Dominion had been so sure scarcity would make us cruel. They didn't understand that scarcity, shared, becomes something else entirely. It becomes solidarity. The galaxy had never seen a species choose voluntarily en masse to go a little hungry so that strangers could eat. They didn't think it was possible. They'd long ago decided that the iron law of scarcity was the iron law of life. Not enough means someone dies, and you make sure it's not you. And 8 billion humans looked at that iron law and said together, no, we'll all take less. There'll be enough. Watch us. And there was enough, barely, but there was enough. Because we made there be enough by choosing to. So that's the how. That's the 11 days. And it brings us back to the receiving field on that final night, with the terrible Dominion ships grinding down out of the sky, and the great doors opening, and the first frightened Threnni beginning to emerge, expecting cruelty, expecting rejection, expecting a world that would let them die. I was on the tarmac. I had my headset and my map and my 11 days of no sleep, and I watched those first Threnni come down the ramps into the work lights, and I watched them flinch and cower and clutch each other and their few pitiful possessions, bracing for the cold welcome they'd been promised. What met them instead was a wall of human beings holding out their hands. We'd organized it carefully. I'd organized a lot of it myself. But no organization could account for what actually happened, because what actually happened came from somewhere deeper than any plan. The Threnni came down the ramps, terrified, And the humans waiting for them, the volunteers, the welcomers, the thousands of ordinary people who'd come to help, did not process them like cargo, the way the Dominion ships had carried them. They welcomed them. They walked forward, hands open, faces full of a warmth the Threnni had not seen since their world fell. They wrapped blankets around shaking shoulders. They pressed warm food into trembling hands, food we tested, food we knew they could eat, the first safe meal many of them had had in weeks. They knelt down to the level of the Threnni children. They used the few words of the Threnni language that millions of humans had frantically learned in 11 days. And oh, that's a detail I love, that millions of us had spent those 11 days learning to say welcome, and you're safe, and you're home now in a language we'd never heard before, so that the first words the Threnni heard on Earth would be words they understood. Savannah Tell, the human, said to them, in halting, badly accented Threnni, "A stranger is only a friend you have not yet fed." We'd learned their own saying. We'd learned the thing they lived by, and we said it back to them, on the tarmac in the work lights, as they came shaking off the slave ships. "A stranger is only a friend you have not yet fed," and then we fed them. I watched a Threnni elder, an ancient stooped figure who must have been a leader of some kind, come down the ramp braced for the worst, and hear those words in his own language from a human stranger, and simply stop. Stop dead on the ramp. And I watched his great soft eyes fill with tears, and I watched him reach out one trembling hand to touch the face of the human who'd spoken, as if to check that it was real, that he wasn't dreaming, that after everything, after the conquest and the cruelty and the long, terrible journey to the world that was supposed to be his grave, he had arrived instead at a place where strangers spoke his own gentle creed back to him and meant it. "You know our words," he whispered in translated Threnni. "How do you know our words?" And the human, just a volunteer, just a nobody like me, said, "We learned them. So you'd know, the moment you arrived, that you were among friends." And the old Threnni put his face in his hands and wept, there on the ramp in the light, while a human he'd never met held him up. That happened 6 million times. Maybe not exactly like that, but some version of that, the moment of bracing for cruelty and receiving kindness instead, happened 6 million times, across every receiving field on Earth, over the days and weeks that followed. 6 million times, a conquered, discarded, despairing person stepped onto a world they'd been told would kill them, and found instead a stranger holding out a hand and a blanket and a warm meal and saying, in their own language, "Welcome home." And the little girl with the seed, I have to tell you about her, because the whole world had seen her photograph, and the whole world was looking for her. She was real. She arrived on the third night at a receiving field in what had once been southern Europe, and somehow, through the chaos, through 6 million arrivals, through all of it, someone recognized her. The little Threnni girl from the photograph, the one who'd held the single seed, who'd become, without knowing it, the face that turned a whole planet's heart. She came down the ramp clutching that same seed, that same impossible hope, into a world she'd been told didn't want her. And the humans who recognized her did something that I think tells you everything about what we are. They didn't make a spectacle of her. They didn't mob her or photograph her or turn her into a symbol. They knelt down very gently to this tiny frightened child, and they asked her through a translator softly what her seed was. And she told them. It was a grain seed from her family's farm, the farm that was gone now, the world that was gone now, the last living piece of everything she'd lost. And the human said, "Would you like to plant it?" And they took that little girl, that very night, to a patch of good earth soil that had been prepared and waiting, and they knelt with her in the dark, and they helped her dig a small hole with her own small hands, and they watched her place her single seed into the soil of her new world. The last seed of a conquered planet, planted in the welcoming ground of the world that had chosen to take her in. And one of the humans, I heard this story so many times it became legend. One of the humans said to her softly, as she patted the soil down over her seed, "It'll grow here. We'll make sure it grows, and so will you." That seed grew. I'll tell you about what it became in the end, because it became the most important plant in the galaxy. But that's for the last part. Now I've told you the beautiful part, the welcome, the kindness, the seed in the soil. And if that were the whole story, it would be a lovely story and the galaxy would have been moved and that would have been that. But that's not the whole story. Because the vast Dominion was watching all of this, watching their cruel punishment turn impossibly into something beautiful, and they were not pleased. They had sent the Threnni to Earth to die and to break us. And instead the Threnni were living, and we were not broken. We were transformed, lit up, united, more ourselves than we'd ever been. The Dominion's punishment was becoming, in front of the whole galaxy, humanity's finest hour. And that was intolerable to them. It made them look weak. It made them look cruel. It made the upstart humans look magnificent. So the Dominion decided to finish what they'd started. If the punishment wouldn't break us on its own, they would break it themselves. They came back, not with bureaucrats this time, with soldiers. And that, the day the vast Dominion warfleet appeared in Earth's sky to take back the 6 million people we'd claimed as our own. And what the humans of Earth did when they came is the last part of the story. It's the part where the galaxy learned, once and for all, exactly what it had woken up. The Dominion fleet came 3 months after the Threnni landed. By then, everything had changed. 3 months is not long, but it was long enough for 6 million strangers to begin to become neighbors. The Threnni were alive, most of them. We'd lost some in the early days to illness and to the wounds of the journey, and we grieved everyone. We held funerals for people we'd known for weeks as if we'd known them for years, because that's another thing humans do. We grieve fast and hard for anyone we've decided is ours. But most of them lived, and more than lived. They were beginning, tentatively, to build. You could see it everywhere by then. Threnni and humans working side by side in the reclamation zones. And here's a thing nobody had predicted. The Threnni were farmers, the best in the galaxy, and Earth was a world desperate to heal its damaged land. And it turned out that 6 million master agriculturalists were not a burden at all but a gift beyond price. The Threnni knew things about soil and growing and patient cultivation that humans had lost or never known. Within 3 months, the regions where the Threnni had settled were greening faster than any reclamation zone in history. We'd taken them in to save them, and they were saving our land in return. The burden was healing the very world that had been told it couldn't afford them. That's the thing the Dominion never understood about generosity. It isn't a transaction where one side loses. The Threnni gift to Earth and the Earth gift to the Threnni had become the same thing, flowing both ways until you couldn't tell anymore who was helping whom. We'd stopped counting. That's what neighbors do. They stop counting. And then the Dominion came to take it all away. I was at the Great Atlantic Settlement the day the fleet appeared, the place that had been a receiving field and was now becoming a town, a real town, with Threnni and human homes going up side by side and the first Threnni grain fields greening on the reclaimed coast. It was afternoon. Children were playing in the fields, Threnni children and human children together, because children don't care about species. They never have, they just find each other and play. I remember a human boy and a Threnni girl, maybe 7 each, running through the young grain with a kite, shrieking with laughter. And then the sky went dark. The Dominion fleet came out of orbit the way a fist comes out of the dark, dozens of warships, vast and black and bristling, blotting out the sun as they descended into the upper atmosphere. They didn't hide. They wanted to be seen. They wanted the terror of it. Warships, real ones this time, the hard edge of an empire that had decided the upstart humans needed a harder lesson than a mere punishment. The message was unmistakable. The Threnni are Dominion property. You have stolen them. We have come to take them back, and to teach you what happens to those who defy the Dominion. The playing children stopped. The kite fell, and every face in that settlement, human and Threnni, turned up to the darkening sky. And the Threnni, oh the Threnni. I will never forget their faces in that moment, because they knew those ships. They'd seen them before, in the sky over Threnn, the day their world was taken. And I watched the hope that we'd spent 3 months building in them just collapse. I watched 6 million people realize that the cruelty had followed them across the stars, that there was no world far enough, that they were going to be taken again, and this time the humans who'd been kind to them would be punished for it. I watched the old elder I'd seen weep on the ramp 3 months before. I knew him now. His name was Tellan. He'd become a friend. I watched Tellan look up at those ships and say, in a voice hollow with despair, "They've come for us. They'll never let us be. We've brought our curse down on you. We should never have let you take us in." And I want to tell you what humanity did then, because this is the moment. This is the whole story. This is the thing the galaxy still tells around its fires on 1,000 worlds when it wants to explain what humans are. We did not run. We did not hide the Threnni. We did not, even for 1 second, consider handing them back to save ourselves. Instead, all over that settlement, and I learned later all over Earth, at every place the Threnni had been welcomed, the humans did the same thing. The same impossible, magnificent, mathematically insane thing. We put ourselves between the Threnni and the ships. It started, like everything in this story, with one person. A woman near me, I didn't know her, just another settler, a mother with her own kids in the grain fields. She walked out into the open, into the shadow of those descending warships, and she took a Threnni child by the hand gently, and she stood there. Just stood there, between the child and the sky. Unarmed, defiant, a single human being planting herself in the path of an empire. And then another person did it, and another, and then it was happening everywhere all at once, the way things happened with us humans walking out into the open, taking Threnni hands, gathering Threnni children behind them and standing, forming themselves into a wall of bodies between the Dominion and the people we'd claimed. Thousands of us in that settlement alone. Millions across the earth. Ordinary, unarmed people, putting their own soft bodies between starships and strangers, and refusing to move. It made no sense. Militarily, it was absurd. Those ships could have scoured the settlement off the face of the earth in seconds. We had nothing that could stop them. Standing there changed nothing about the firepower in the sky. By every law of war and survival, it was a meaningless gesture. A few million soft animals standing in a field, shaking their fists at an empire that could erase them with a thought. But it wasn't meaningless, because it said something. It said something the Dominion had no answer to. It said, "If you want them, you will have to come through us, every one of them. You will have to kill 6 million humans to take 6 million Threnni, and you will have to do it in front of the whole galaxy, and you will have to live forever as the empire that murdered a young species for the crime of being kind. We will not move. We have decided. They are ours now. They are home, and you do not get to take our neighbors without taking us first." The Dominion fleet hung in the sky, and it did not fire. I learned much later why. I learned what was happening up in those ships, in the long, terrible minutes while we stood in the fields and stared up at our own possible deaths. I learned that the Dominion commanders were arguing. Because they had come expecting to find a frightened world that would hand the Threnni back to save itself. That's what any sensible species would do. That's what the iron law of survival demanded. They had not come expecting 6 million unarmed humans to form a wall of their own bodies and dare an empire to murder them all. It broke their model of how the universe worked. They didn't have a protocol for it. You cannot threaten people who have already decided to die rather than yield. The threat is your only weapon, and against people who won't yield to it, you have nothing left but the act itself. And the act, the actual murder of millions of unarmed people who were guilty of nothing but kindness, broadcast to a watching galaxy, was a thing even the Dominion was not sure it could survive. Because the galaxy was watching. That was the other thing. The whole Concord was watching on every screen on every world the same way they'd watched the punishment begin. They'd watched the cruel sentence handed down. They'd watched the poor young humans expected to break, instead open their arms. They'd watched 6 million doomed strangers find a home. They'd watched a little girl plant a seed. And now they were watching the empire that had done it all come back with warships to finish the job. And they were watching a whole species stand unarmed in the open and refuse to let it happen. And something shifted in those watching worlds. Something the Dominion had not counted on, because the galaxy had grown used to its own cruelties, the conquests, the relocations, the iron law of the strong eating the weak. They'd forgotten there was any other way. And here were the humans, the youngest and poorest and weakest of them all, showing the whole galaxy in real time that there was another way, that you could choose the stranger over the safe thing, that you could stand up. That kindness was not weakness. That kindness, when it set its feet and refused to move, was the strongest force in the universe, because it was the one thing power could not break without destroying itself in the process. It was Talon who walked forward, the old Threnni elder, my friend. While the humans stood in their wall and the Dominion ships hung in the sky deciding whether to commit a galactic atrocity, old Talon stooped, ancient, gentle Talon walked out from behind the wall of human bodies that was protecting him, walked out into the open, alone, into the full view of the ships, and the humans cried out for him to come back, to get behind us, to let us shield him, and he would not. He stood there, this old farmer, this poet, this conquered man, alone under the warships of the empire that had destroyed his world. And he spoke. He had some way of amplifying his voice, or perhaps the ships were listening. I don't know how they heard him, but they heard him, and so did the watching galaxy. And what he said, I have carried in my heart every day since. He said, I am Talon of Threnni. You took my world. You sent my people to die. And instead, strangers took us in and fed us and learned our words and called us neighbors, and now they stand between us and you, ready to die for people they met 3 months ago. You wanted to teach the humans a lesson. Instead, they have taught one to the whole galaxy. They have taught us what we forgot, that the measure of a people is not what they can take, but what they will give, and who they will stand beside when the ships come. I will not hide behind them while they die for me. If you fire, fire on me first. But know that you are not firing on the weak. You are firing on the strongest thing in this galaxy. You are firing on people who chose each other. And that choice will outlive your empire. It will outlive all of us. Savannah Tell. A stranger is only a friend you have not yet fed. The humans fed us. We are not strangers anymore. We are home. And he stood there, an old man alone under the guns, and he waited. The Dominion fleet left. I wish I could tell you it was because their hearts were moved. Maybe some of them were. I like to think even hard empires have somewhere a few souls who can be reached. But the truth is more practical and, in its way, more important. They left because they had been beaten. Not militarily, they could have won the battle in an instant. They left because they had lost something there is no winning back. They had lost in front of the whole galaxy. They had been shown on every screen on every world to be the cruel ones, the small ones, the ones who brought warships against the kindness of the young. And the humans had been shown to be the opposite. And the conquered, the watching, ancient, cynical conquered, would not stand with the Dominion after that. Could not. The political ground had shifted under the Empire's feet, in those long minutes in the field, and they knew it. To fire would be to make themselves monsters before the entire galaxy, and to lose far more than they could gain. So they hung in the sky, and they did the math, and they left. The fleet rose back into orbit and was gone, and the sun came back, and 6 million Threnni and the humans who'd stood for them stood in the green fields in the returning light and understood that they had won. We had faced down an empire with nothing but our own bodies and our refusal to yield, and we had won. The cheer that went up, human and Threnni voices together, I felt it in my chest like a second heartbeat. Talon stood alone in the field where he'd faced the guns, and the humans ran to him and lifted him, this frail old conquered farmer who had just stared down an empire, and we carried him on our shoulders through the cheering fields, and he laughed and wept at the same time, and so did I, and so did all of us. That was the turning point. Not just for us, for the galaxy. Because the conquered saw that day what humanity was, and the galaxy's contempt began from that day to turn into something else. Not respect exactly. Something deeper and warier and more profound. The old species had spent millennia believing that strength was the only language the universe spoke, that the strong took and the weak were taken, that kindness was a luxury for the safe and a fatal weakness for everyone else. And the youngest, poorest species at the table had just proven them wrong in front of everyone, had shown that there was another kind of strength entirely, the strength of a people who choose each other, who stand together, who would rather die as one than survive as betrayers. And that strength, it turned out, could face down warships and win. The galaxy never looked at humans the same way again. The species that had been a joke, a nuisance, a poor relation at the table, became, almost overnight, something the old powers found they had to reckon with, and slowly over the years that followed, something they found they wanted to be near. Because here is the secret the Dominion accidentally taught the whole galaxy that day. Everyone, even the hard old empires, even the cynical ancient species, everyone is tired of the iron law of the strong eating the weak. Everyone, somewhere down deep, is hungry for the other thing, for the welcome, for the open hand, for a place where a stranger is only a friend you have not yet fed. The humans didn't invent that hunger. They just reminded the galaxy it was there by being, unashamedly, the people who lived by it. In the years that followed, the Threnni stayed. Of course they stayed. Earth was their home now as much as it was ours, and there were human Threnni towns, and then human Threnni families, and then a whole shared culture growing up out of the soil we'd healed together. And other peoples started to come too, the galaxies discarded, the conquered, the refugees from 100 cruelties, drawn to the one world that had shown it would take them in. Earth became, in time, exactly the thing the Dominion had tried to punish us for being. The world that opened its arms, the neighbor of all the neighborless. And we grew strong on it, strong in the way that matters, strong in friends and trust and the deep wealth of being the people others can count on. The Dominion tried to make us poor by giving us 6 million mouths to feed. They made us rich beyond their imagining. They just didn't understand what wealth was. The seed grew. I promised I'd tell you. The little girl's seed, the single grain seed she'd carried from her dead world that she'd planted in the dark on her first night on Earth, with a human's hands helping her own. It grew. It became a stalk, and the stalk made more seeds, and those seeds were planted. And within a few years the grain of Threnn was growing across the reclaimed lands of Earth. A Threnni crop in human soil, feeding both peoples, greening a wounded world. The last seed of a conquered planet became, in the welcoming ground of Earth, the most widely planted grain in the settled galaxy. It feeds dozens of worlds now. It started with one child and one seed and one human who knelt in the dark and said, "It'll grow here. And so will you." She grew too, the little girl. She's not little anymore, she's older than I was when the ships came now, and she's one of the great agricultural leaders of the joined human Threnni world, and she has children of her own, human and Threnni both, because that's how it is now, the families are all woven together. And every year on the anniversary of the landing she plants a seed, by hand, in the dark, the way she did that first night. And every year the whole world plants with her. Billions of humans and Threnni and all the others who have come since, all kneeling in the soil together, planting seeds, remembering. I plant one too. I'm old now, older than old Tellan was that day in the field. He's gone now, our Tellan. He lived a long good life among us, and we buried him in Earth's soil as one of our own, and the whole world grieved him. But I plant my seed every year, with my hands that shake now the way his shook on the ramp the day he arrived, and I remember. People ask me, the young ones, the visitors from the stars, weren't you afraid? When the ships came, when they sent you 6 million strangers you couldn't feed, weren't you afraid it would all go wrong? And I tell them, of course we were afraid. We were terrified. The fear was real and the danger was real, and there was every reason to believe we couldn't do it. That's what makes it matter. Courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is being afraid and counting the cost and knowing it might break you and opening the door anyway. We weren't fearless. We were just unwilling to become the kind of people who let the strangers die at the gate. That's all. That's the whole secret. There's no magic to it. We just decided who we wanted to be, and then we paid what it cost to be those people. They sent us 6 million refugees as a punishment. They were certain it would break us. We chose to call them neighbors, and it made us, and in time it made the whole galaxy into something better than we'd ever been. The Dominion thought they understood power. They thought power was the fist, the fleet, the ability to take. They never understood the only power that lasts, the power of the open hand. The power of Savannah Tell. The power of a people who, told there wasn't enough, chose to make enough, who sent strangers to break them, chose instead to make a home. A stranger is only a friend you have not yet fed. We fed 6 million strangers, on a night we were sure we couldn't. And the galaxy has never gone hungry for friends since.